resurrection of Jesus Christ is the fact at the center of real Christianity. It's the one most important fact that Christianity is built on. And if the resurrection isn't true, then Christianity is in real problems. There are accounts of the resurrection of Jesus in the Bible. There are lots of them, lots of verses there. These accounts are full of incident, they're full of detail. The different accounts are more or less independent of one another, and it can be quite difficult to put together those details to make a single core narrative. And because of this, some skeptics challenge Christianity by asking, can we put together the gospel accounts of the resurrection to make a unified picture? The assumption they're making is that you can't do that. Well, we can, and this video starts to explain how that's done. It's about the complexity mainly of the resurrection accounts, and there are some other videos which go with it, which go in detail through the accounts of the day of the crucifixion and the day of the resurrection. So look in the description below and see where those videos are, or you can subscribe to the channel. If you do that, then you'll be able to find those videos as they appear, and you'll be able to, by clicking the notify bell, get information when videos on this are released in the future. So let's have a little look at the problem. The accounts of the resurrection appear in all four of the Gospels, and they appear in the book of Acts of the Apostles and in 1 Corinthians. Altogether, there are 165 verses which describe the resurrection, and those verses each tell a story. If you look at them, you'll find that they are very clearly not copies of one another. Putting them together is quite a difficult business. Not only are there different accounts from different viewpoints, they describe 28 different incidents going on the day of resurrection. Those incidents involve 8 main groups of people. That's groups of people. Those groups are things which form and then split up and join up into different groups again later on. So they get difficult, and there are additional people who aren't in these main groups. So keeping track of all of them is quite a difficult problem. And the gospel writers weren't present at every event. So John writes from his own point of view part of the time, but when he's talking about Mary Magdalene on her own at the tomb of Jesus, he must be using a different source, probably Mary Magdalene. So altogether, there are 14 or more different sources whose information is used in the Gospels to describe what is going on. So there's a lot to put together into one account. The challenge that the skeptics often give us is a challenge to put together those events of the resurrection into order, put them where there are 2 different accounts, the same ones at the same time. We can leave nothing out from the 165 verses, and there must be no contradictions within it. Can that be done, they say? They obviously assume it can't be done, and that by trying to do it, we will show that the resurrection accounts don't hold up. Well, the problem is that it is a complicated thing to do. There are all these different people, there are all these different groups, there are all these different events, but nonetheless, that challenge can be met. So, question, do you think it's a reasonable challenge for the resurrection accounts? Does the fact that you can put them together, that the challenge can be answered, tell us anything about those resurrection accounts? If you've got views on those questions, then try writing them in the comments section below this video. Anyway, let's look at the day that Jesus died on the cross. This is accounted in all 4 of the Gospels. and we can put together the various events quite simply. It's the story of Jesus. The events are in the same order in every gospel. They concentrate on one chain of things going on, and we can look at it and we can put together a set of times. There's only one issue of any major scale. That's the question of which day Jesus actually died on, because some of the Gospels, John's Gospel, for example, says that Jesus died on the day before the Passover, and the Synoptic Gospels tell us that the Last Supper was held on the day before the Passover. And the question is, how can that happen? Aren't they different days? Well, no, they aren't different days, because Jewish days, and the people who wrote the Gospels were from the Jewish community, those days start at sunset. So Last Supper happened after sunset, and it happened on the same Jewish day as the crucifixion of Jesus, on the day before the Passover meal, on the day on which the Passover lamb was sacrificed. So, in fact, there isn't a problem there. It's something that's quite quickly sorted out. So we have Jesus being arrested in the middle of the night after the Last Supper, which starts fairly early on in the day, shortly after, well, maybe an hour or so after the day started at 6 o'clock in the evening. He goes to Gethsemane. There he's arrested. He's taken to the high priest's house where he's interrogated, and they put together a case against him. As soon as it's dawn, there's a trial before the Sanhedrin. He's then taken up to the Roman governor, where he's condemned to death, and he's then crucified. There's darkness. He dies shortly after that, and is buried. All that happens before the sun sets, and it's the new day. The day of the resurrection is the more difficult one to put together. It does have all these different incidents and groups of people to look at, but nonetheless, it can still be put together. What we've done is we've taken the accounts in the different Gospels, in Acts, in 1 Corinthians, divided it down into the different incidents, and then put together a chart to show how those things happen. So here we are. This is the chart of the day of resurrection. So, for example, the arrows show what happens before what. So the women, for example, let's look at this one. The women meet angels in the tomb. That must happen after they got the tomb and found it open. And various things happen after that. So Salome splits off from the women. She goes back to the place where she's staying, which turns out to be the house that John the disciples' family owned in Jerusalem. Some of the other women go off and tell the disciples what's happened. And this one, B, comes up over there. So Peter and John don't visit the tomb until the women have left. So that happens after this one. Rather than cross over the lines, I've just put a letter in a circle to show where it joins up. It all starts together at one point at the beginning, and it ends, well, Salome takes no further part in it after that. So we've got an end there, but most of them, there's an end here. I've again kept the two separate, so there's not to end up with lines crossing one another in the diagram. And you can tell by looking at it what happens before what. And it's quite a complicated set of relationships. You can see that it is going to take some untangling. But by untangling it, you can put together a sequence of events. That more than one sequence is possible, but those sequences are there. And we have there a representation of the events which is biblical. It fits all the accounts in the Bible. It's completely consistent with all of them. It's complete. It doesn't leave any of the episodes out. Actually, the diagram does. It leaves out the event of the death of Judas Iscariot. The reason it does that is because it's not clear exactly when that happens within the sequence. It's separate from everything else. But all the episodes are accounted for in the account we've got. It has no contradictions in it. It's nothing where you say one of the events must happen before one of the others, but it must be true the other way around as well. So there are no contradictions in it, and it's completely feasible. No one is ever in two places at once, and you never have two people who should be apart from one another together in the same place. So what we have is a picture of something which is certainly a feasible thing that could happen. It fits the Bible, and it describes completely everything that happened. So we managed to put together everything for the day of the resurrection into one account. And if you look at the right video, if you look at one of our following videos, the one which says the day Jesus rose from the dead, then we'll go into that in a little more detail. It's a different way of looking at it. You can use the methods of critical path analysis, and from that you can work out feasible timetables. There are quite a few feasible timetables, but we picked one of those as the most likely. Other people might disagree. They might think one of the other ones is more likely, but there certainly are feasible timetables that would fit the events of the day of resurrection. Again, it's worth asking the question, what does the fact that the accounts of the resurrection are so complex but are compatible with one another tell us about the Gospels? Again, if you've got something to say about that, put in the comments below. The point about it is it's rather like having a jigsaw. Got all these pieces, each one of them quite complicated shape, but if you put them together, you find there's a single picture. What that's telling us? Well, it's telling us that that jigsaw really does have a proper picture, that it's made properly, that it's all one picture. If you had a jigsaw like that, you would be very silly to believe that the parts were made up by different people and that they just somehow managed to fit together. The same way the resurrection accounts can only get like this because they fit in with the way that things actually happened. Have a quick look at the timetable that we come up with. So we start off at the 6 p.m. again, the time the day starts, and that's when we have some women who go on to the market. You've got them setting off just before dawn to go to the tomb. Some of them set off earlier, some of them set off a little bit later. They find the tomb empty. They go scatter in 3 different directions. Peter and John come to the tomb. They see it empty. Mary Magdalene meets the risen Jesus on her own. She actually goes into the tomb rather later than the other ladies. Having been there once and run away, she comes back. There she meets Jesus. You have people heading off to Emmaus. Jesus meets them on the road. They get back much later, just after Peter has met Jesus in Jerusalem. And then Jesus meets most of the disciples in the upper room, and the day ends again at around 6 o'clock with everybody. Well, we don't know what happened to them, but presumably they went back to their lodgings and slept there rather than all together in one place. So there is a consistent picture that comes up from it. What it's telling us is that this very complicated set of events fits together to make a single picture. Now, it will be very hard for the disciples who wrote the Gospels, or the people who wrote the Gospels, to make that up and get it to fit. You'd have to have 5 different people writing 6 different documents. They would have to make the pieces separately, and they'd all have to fit together. We can do that now because we have modern techniques for looking at scheduling. They didn't have those then, so they couldn't have put everything together in one go. So the fact that the different accounts fit together so well is good evidence that the resurrection accounts are accounts of a real thing. So we can only construct our modern schedule using modern mathematical techniques, totally not available at the time. It would have been absolutely impossible for the gospel writers to have invented those accounts. And so what we have is an accurate description of the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And an accurate account of the death and resurrection of Jesus, which includes Jesus rising from the dead is an account which talks about a fact of history. And the resurrection of Jesus is a fact of history, and that's what this analysis shows. So look out for the coming videos on this channel. There they are, the day Jesus died on the cross, the day Jesus rose from the dead, and then the third one, evidence for the resurrection.